What Was Plato? September Essay on Public Dialogue. Part 1. One summer evening at sunset, I sat against a tree in Somerville's Foss Park. I had gone to the park to think. At the time, I thought thinking more would lead me to what I was looking for, but really I had been in a bit of a conundrum for years. One of the tangible changes in my life that had occurred was that I had left an academic environment. I was continuing to study, but decidedly on my own. I was no longer in a group where information that interested me was discussed. As an author, I was drawn to experience more areas than I thought another degree program would provide. Seeking experience in a more nomadic yet commonplace existence, working odd jobs, teaching, and reading in isolation, had caused me a lot of strife, but I attributed this to the idea that people in general were unwilling to learn. There was one thing that became apparent. I cared more about history and literature than most people I met. When I made my attempt at small talk, I would be referencing books and ideas that probably did not belong in small talk, looking for answers to what I was thinking about, completely out of context for the others I met. After a year or so, unable to see the matter, I could not integrate my subjective interests and creative desires in society, causing me to feel alienated and even sick. Without first respecting or even understanding what was common in the everyday life of others, there was something schizophrenic about my subjects of interest. I had left the walls of the university, the ivory tower, and I had brought a bunch of names and random dates around with me, passionately discussing them in a public that usually had few popular subjects of interest based on social media concerns as it appeared on the social networks that had been introduced to my generation, and others as powerful and usurping communication technology. That evening, I had brought the same names and dates with me to the park as I sat against the tree. For whatever reason, I was thinking about Plato, born in 427. One of most influential and original philosophers in the history of Western society. Multitudes, even if they don't know why, have heard the name of Plato. I admit that is what I think I understand about Plato's philosophy is marvelous, but I have yet to make a real sturdy study of his work. I've learned about Plato through friends I met in university rather than in my own reading of his pinnacle works like dialogues, and understand his notion of forms in general, and can retell his allegory of the cave. Plato is boilerplate, but that doesn't mean his significance isn't relevant in particular spots. While I thought about Plato, I was still telling myself the same mantras that I suppose we all consider now as we try to meditate. That is, be present, time is an illusion, I am nothing, jargon along these lines that still doesn't really relax the body as phrases alone if we can't use them simply like a mantra. So I sat there, watching the sunset, and as the majority of the sky was navy blue and the bottom near the trees was scarlet, I had a strange solipsistic moment. Feeling like only my sense of I was the basis of existence, I reasoned, if I am the great I, and I am the present, and only I exist, then what the heck is Plato? If Plato were not really a person and my life is all a dream based on I, Plato is only an airy concept, a type of form, not too different from a god, the archetypal philosopher. It felt for a moment as if Plato has forever been simply some dead guy illusion that is supposed to make me personally think twice, the archetype of the philosopher, but not actually a man like myself. I considered this sitting in a field as innumerable people before me had that day, on that same grass in a domain called nature that is supposed to be unchanged from things like man-made history. And my consideration was very funny, in part because even if that were the case, Plato is an extremely successful philosopher. Looking back on that contemplation against that tree in Foss Park, it seems that many people, maybe the majority, might think of Plato like this, a concept, not a person like themselves, as if he is just a lie, or what's more, just a name. The concern I have with this ignorance is manifold, but there is one particular angle of not taking the time to even consider the real life of a great philosopher that I find to be very stupid. People still use his name to denote intelligence or something beyond comprehension. Oh yeah, like Plato. It is as if they understand Plato enough to say he is irrelevant to their current life experience because he was much smarter and lived at a different time and place. High school peers of mine, who I had parted ways with or knew before I started taking academics seriously, seemed to think it is virtuous to ignore names like Plato, and to many of my generation, Nietzsche, born in 1844, is actually a song reference pronounced Nietzsche, before he was his own man writing divinely inspired sentences until he could do nothing but foam at the mouth. These names seem like other names. They are the archetypal philosopher. But they were flesh and blood humans, not just conceptual archetypes. This seems to be important to culture among capable young people as we strive to improve from the banality of our ancestors and treat each other more kindly. And I think that's selling us short. For we are people who can think, not just actors or pop stars. And understanding the intricacies of philosophers who remain prominent in historical records would help us to be less swayed as individual human brains by influences that take away our liberty, since these people were human and strove to understand and lend understanding. Perhaps influencing the infinite that we sometimes are ill-equipped to live with in harmony, requiring shallower models of possibility for the lives of ourselves, the future, society, and family. However, if I express my point of view using allusions to a table of friends who don't care, all of my historical allusions come across as an incantation to something dark, some odd quirk that is very subjective to me, like Plato is probably a psychological substitute for my father or something. In place of real intellectual contribution by other beings of flesh, many who left me at higher education's crossroads counter my allusions with stories about the people they know, the gossip, the doxa. There is often a family member or a neighbor whose experience is more valuable to the person's idea of truth than a man like Plato, who, academics can confirm, had ideas and work that still provide us with a working system of understanding our life of experience. Unless, of course, he is some hallucination of mine, and that is just some very subjective claim I'm making because, as someone who reads a lot, I must not be down to earth. To those outside of the validating and detail-oriented sphere of academia, allusion to a historical figure, much of the time, does not build any validity to a point being made. Instead, it amounts to a name, one that could even make the speaker's point more invalid, or removed from reality. How do I even know Plato exists? I may know Plato exists, but I don't know what Bill Bob knows, or what color shoelaces John the Baker, born 1992, uses, or what Jeremy's cousin, born 1985, his wake felt like. Here there is a sort of crossroads, one that I have experienced that has made me feel very alien from people while not being around birds of a feather. What the layman doesn't always understand about academics is that some of them are actually deeply passionate. They read and study to learn, almost out of fear of being totally incompetent. Not just to put up their noses or to make those who have free access to books but don't read need to double up on their nonsense that we can't be that smart. I like books, and I like to think I learn from the books, but of course I don't know all my enemies know. We have separate lives. That is a very important freedom. I cannot say that Plato is more important or more real than John or Jeremy's cousin, of course, but John the Baker is more real than Plato to many people because he drools the same drab. Talks about nothing. Doesn't care about Halley's Comet. I would like to submit these questions. Can a person really understand John the Baker if they are unable to appreciate the breadth of an entity like Plato? What is one denying when they snicker off a mention of Plato, whom they don't even understand? It can be dangerous to bring up Plato to try and discuss what one holds dear, humanities, in the wrong company, because while he exists as part of the universe to a learned person, and keeping him as merely a choice of the individual to exist or not is madness. His existence might be denied in the wrong company, who, then, in a way, denies the speaker. And the speaker must know just how much they need to be confirmed by others when it comes to what they care about. A bar table, a new acquaintance, These are not people who confirm or deny that Plato walked around in a toga. A historian loves history and safeguards it from such situations when one John is all Johns, but is not a model or archetype so much as what the layman is comfortable with their relative. If the idea that contemporaries incarnate are the most valid people around, then how is it we can even discuss John the Baker in the room in which we bring up his name? When sitting at a bar table and talking about John the Baker, Plato is not there, but neither is John the Baker. What's more, the person who is saying they understand John is likely to be overestimating their ability to do so if they have never entertained the idea that a man turned himself into Plato, and not the putty, Play-Doh, that children mold with. A person whose existence is backed and supported by a pillar of civilization, the university. Part 2. We are all entitled to our own point of view in America. Being able to have our own lives is one of the most important things about this society. There is wisdom in knowing one's contemporaries, familial branches, and neighborhood, and no one needs to or has ever really denied that. Family is one of the most enshrined elements of our individual identity. Our contemporaries of flesh and blood are evolving in the same world that we are. I do not believe it is wrong to know of John the Baker's shoelaces or to take on some grief from the passing of Jeremy's cousin, but simultaneously, history and education is important, and true history, how far we've come, is even liberating to the common people if we understand how far we've come as a species, particularly when it comes to the development of technologies and acceptance of others not like ourselves. Many who think I am blinded by book learning are hopelessly conditioned by capitalism, and do not know how far the rabbit hole goes because they don't know that it is relatively new to judge others as lesser because making more money is not their top priority. Culture. For much of human history, the middle class and lower class has been feudal or peasant population lorded over by kings, controlled, forced to fight one another over beliefs. But can that still be in an age of the internet of information? I have started to think in this age more than others, when we have the internet of information cushioned with algorithms that are designed to confirm our cognitive biases, people are becoming too sure of the little they know and aren't really able to think past a name or a quote, despite the fact they don't know the context of the quote. We are not necessarily building any objective common sense with a potentially global common history. Postmodernism's attempt to combine many sources was a step, but the human characters are often apathetic, privileged, uninspired to improve how we might see and make sense of the world and others because of all that is known. We could make a real doozy of a change in local environments where intelligence is more than ever up for grabs, and the common goal need not be one that causes strife, but could cause love, harmony, an experience of beauty and peace. Rather, many, especially outside of academia, are seeing illusions as simply names on the internet, and Plato, maybe Nietzsche, or even Picasso, born 1881, are coming off to the layman as all the same, whereas in the past, even in a city like London, less access to records may have made it so that big names, thinkers, artists, or writers were known a little more for their particular light rather than their name, which is sometimes used to sell paintbrushes. The layperson now has information, and this information greatly exceeds their understanding. But that is mostly because I pay attention to how they talk about things when I don't know them intimately, and I'm not in a classroom or accrediting social networks with representations of the cognitive abilities of the people around me before I learn how to adapt on Earth as an educated adult. My old friends hear Plato. There are times, like in a rabble on the street, when a name like that is proven to be irrelevant, but then a problem can be fixed, a change can be made, and Plato remains useful for contemplation. She shouts out his name, calling for a real man who cannot rely on history to be a great man today as is needed. Now, because I am a writer and a university person, I am very sensitive to words and want them to keep meanings, like Heraclitus, born in 1540 BC, did with his logos, believing in the virtue of language being key for truth. Though there is much more language circa 2023 in new places and contexts, I see signage and pool water on the sides of passing trucks, separate than the overgrowth on a street median, and why should that be prominent sign? There is another source other than the internet where many allusions are coming to the minds of the youth: music. As an American lover of music and someone who has taught high school age students, I see hip hop music introduces much of the youth to Picasso being cool or Plato personifying intelligence. Hip hop artists are able to portray the attitude of a person who is born with less advantages and he has a capable brain and enshrined subjective experience that allows them to have their own relationship with God or truth. Hip hop music is filled with illusions. In this way, it is often how young people are most passionately connected with the names of historical personages. They want to feel like Picasso, who the singer feels emulates in a lyric, "I am like Picasso." I do not need to name a specific song or musician in particular because allusions to entities like Picasso and Einstein, born 1879, are common in the lyrics of hip-hop music nowadays. The historical and educative elements of that music, but I will say these allusions are probably used in this medium to express a type of self-confidence in one's own art or mind or style, while actual knowledge of the person's historical significance and catalog is uncertain, unless the allusion is coupled with another kind of relevant reference implied by the musician. So music, as well as books and TV, is teaching the youth names. That is why a young person is likely to feel like Picasso without ever seeing a work of the blue or rose periods. The name has become a type of invocation of passion rather than reference to an actual person with a body of work, a life experience of an artist whose whole story is certainly more educative than a brand. Then there are blunders, such as hearing Goya in a song and not being sure if the Goya is the painter, Francisco Goya, born 1746, or the food company Goya. To me, it is a brilliant reference to Goya in a song, to others, the fruit brand. Some don't hear it, and many don't care. Corporate entities have also commercialized names, and it is at this point that the chicken or the egg phenomenon is concerning, because before Van Gogh was making money as a name selling paintbrushes, there was a lonely, angry man sleeping in a barn, feverishly painting a lot of rejected images, though feeling the gospel in nature. Although all will one day be a park with no one looking at it, does it really matter if these people are people or brands? Yes, and the children should look more into the lives and to give them an idea of what's possible. What's the same about people who persevere, why their names might be important than just an idea, humans who transcended many woes. As youth come into the world, this is part 3, as youth come into the world in which the rate of exchange of information has been changed by the internet, they will have access to much information, names, and dates. But how do we encourage further curiosity about historical figures and encourage others to look deeper into the arguably random names and dates beloved by academics who are able to lecture of the depths behind these symbolic names? Why do I sit against the tree in Somerville minding important names and dates? It is wise to contest and feel emotion about Jose's mention of John versus Plato. I think the answer resides in our approach to others who don't really care about the same things. It is absolutely vital that despite how weird or uncomfortable it becomes when sitting alone against the tree, we do realize that history and the humanities are part of the meaning of our life here. One does not need to confirm what they have learned by research, but must understand that and come to peace with having knowledge. The answer in a random chat is more about emotion, connotation of words, than about a debate that might take place between two old dogs. Perhaps history gives us direction. If we want to be remembered as good role models to our ancestors who may look down from above, or even our grandchildren knowing a bit of history, even a kernel, passes the curiosity to family. History is an element in that way, a network with considerable safety nets that allow sanity if one can learn to recognize contexts. There is a time and place to contemplate. There is a time and place to let words go in one ear and out the other. Even if, on the outside of the ivory tower, it doesn't seem to be relevant, understanding the dead is in line with preserving integrity in everything else, from John the Baker to St. John of the Cross, born 1542. For we are living, dying things, and should acknowledge that as we conceive of what we are doing and can do with our lives, in the case where a peer doesn't care about Plato's Lost Atlantis because he can't make small talk in the way that he can with John the Baker, or who thinks Jay-Z invented Picasso by mention in a song, Jay-Z born 1969. When chronology or using sources is out the window, we just need to approach the situation with a light heart and set the mood. Then we might not even feel the need for historical illusion as we participate in history now. Is the mind the cave where we keep our store? But how we represent our learning should come off in our attitude as much as our logos. Use the reasoning strategies we learned from our reading rather than being so rigid about names and dates ourselves, to know empathy and to find sense in another's way of expressing themselves. Compassion is the answer, the X factor, always. No matter how much we think we retain, for a person can just as easily help you stay oriented, happy, and healthy as deny they can understand what you mean. Not everyone is academic, but that does not take away the worth of a learned person. More so, it increases the worth of that person if they can value private contemplation, to think by a tree and not need to run up to another person and continue that thinking. More academics need to learn how to adapt to the role of a knowledgeable person in places where knowledge is unpopular. To believe people are stupid is stupid. Perhaps our love for academics remains irrelevant to the conversation. We can then try to teach someone something, and I would submit that maybe before we use names, of which there is not shortage, we introduce the idea of Platonic love before Plato, or Cubism as an aesthetic style when the opportunity to identify an aesthetic lands us. Part 4. As the information of the internet allows further generations to look things up, and as history seems more and more mind-boggling due to the amount of information and histories from all around the globe, it is older people's responsibility to preserve the reason for there being objective history, because no one else is going to be doing that in our lifetime. And a human who knows history is different than a database, as we are human like Plato. The youth who learns information seldom know why. The common man is not stupid, they are just biased. The inexperienced scholar can only feel comfortable in a place where the names they know are relevant. Quietism, the philosophy that philosophy can be remedial and help confusion, is what I believe at large and what I hope to practice now in a new year among other trees. Let us all be birds of a feather and learn how to act intelligent and together in public with all we know. What was Plato? Do you mean who? The philosopher from ancient Athens who inspired the modern university told us no utopia would play sad music, gave us an account of the lost city of Atlantis, told us our reality is only the flickering shadows of a fire we cannot face. What was Plato with my back against the tree? A flesh and blood man who has had to live immature amongst people with different roles in society to understand the humanities continue even now. Every person must be able to keep their head up from the day to day to realize they are living in an atmosphere of history. Plato should not be a warped childhood memory of Plato, just a hip-hop entendre, nor should he be understood as just another philosopher. His ideas, or the idea of him, exists for us nowadays in 2023 to apply for our benefit in rendering a happy life that enhances the lives of others. Now, to the some, the philosopher Plato is just one of those names many academics light up about. The point is that history needs to be an unspoken part of our public dealings. It is an element that we who are over the hill of youth are responsible for keeping grounded as more and more information piles in. And while the academic can present the finer information, we must all open about objective history as the public of the United States of America. It is not just opinion. John the baker did not live the life of Plato, but he could be more like Plato if we learned to exchange bread in theory. I was sitting at the park alone with names and dates. I come here to confirm that they can't help us stay sharp. Here is the demonstration of a learned man in the same public that misguided mind vilifies when they begin to adopt negative associations with the human being in general. History can show us greatly what is possible in moments when we are sitting against trees in parks thinking of what there is to do for others with what we love to learn. And there are clouds that break apart where we can make out the likenesses of animals.